Hi everyone, it's Angela from She Simply Impacts, and I have a fabulous panel of our experts here with me today, and we're going to have a discussion around embracing your vulnerability and unlocking your true potential. So I've got Indrani with us, and Indrani she does coaching, and she's a counselor and a supervisor and an expert in trauma. We've got Renee Bailey, who's a degree qualified clinical nutritionist. Sashua Benay is our amazing facilitator today, and she is a mindset transformation intuitive coach and a public speaking coach. And we have Sabina Armbruster from She Momentum, who is one of our business coaches on the platform. So I will hand it over to Sashua. She's going to facilitate the discussion. And yeah, thanks for joining us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Angela, and welcome all. It's brilliant to bring these minds, these energies together to explore this incredible topic. As Angela mentioned, embrace your vulnerability and unlock your true potential. So we are going to do a deep dive into this topic today to really touch the core of our human experience, because vulnerability is one of the things that differentiates us from many others and from each other as well. And as we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land where I'm meeting today, the Kanyuni people, and all the people from your locations as well, paying respect to elders past, present, and emerging. So as we start to dive into this topic of vulnerability and understanding that sometimes that can take courage to show up in certain situations, courage to be seen and not always have control over the outcome. So I'd love perhaps let's go to you first, Sabina, and just share on how you feel vulnerability has strengthened your journey up till now.
That's such a good question. Thank you, Sashua. The way vulnerability has strengthened my journey is, I think it's forced me to step out of my comfort zone. I never really understood the power of vulnerability when you're developing as a person, when you're starting a business, when you're growing a business, when you're helping other people. It's one of those things that really, it exposes you, but it also helps people understand who you are. And it took me a long time to be okay with that. And it's really only been the last few years that I've found a way to do that in a way that doesn't compromise who I am or what I believe in. So it has made me step out of my comfort zone, but it's also helped me, understand what I can and can't do within my, I guess, values or area of values. Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Beautiful. Excellent insights. Thank you, Sabina. And coming back to you now, Angela, in your journey, you often speak of your personal stories and what brought you to make some of the decisions you have in life and in business. What's your perspective on vulnerability and how it has fueled you in your life?
So I would say that the more I was willing to be vulnerable, the more rich my life is. So it's like obviously in launching She Simply Impacts, I was extremely nervous when I was first putting the vision out there, and I was very shaky. And so that was, it was it really required a lot of courage, and it was sort of counterbalancing sharing more of my true story, which I'd never really shared before, with the feelings of shame that come up when I share it. It's sort of interesting, but the more I push through that, the richer really the richer I am, the more courage and the more courageous I am when it comes to sharing my vulnerability. I think, because that's really what we're selling in She Simply Impacts in many ways. We're selling vulnerability, because unless we come to sessions and we're willing to be vulnerable, we're not going to grow. That's where the growth is.
So true. That's where the magic happens, isn't it? When everyone can let their guard down a little bit and just really talk quite openly about what's going on for us. And that sets the scene then for true transformation. Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Angela. So coming to you now, Indrani, thinking about the customers and clients that you work with in many different formats, many different scenarios, where do you feel vulnerability is important, if not essential, to bring into the conversation?
When you're talking about vulnerability, so if I see it as a personally, as a therapist for myself, and it's a, I have to be careful how I answer this question, because if I answer as a personally, just as a me, Indrani, I would say I see vulnerability as the capacity to trust me and being okay with uncertainty and being able to trust the environment that I'm in. Now, it's a little bit like when I come to vulnerability, we have two different facets, where physical vulnerability and the emotional vulnerability. I guess I got to be careful if I say vulnerability on the whole, in broad term, I could possibly mislead people. Because there are, in my work, there'll be a lot of people who vulnerability would be completely letting go of their safety. So in the work term, I will work with the people who have lost the capacity to be vulnerable. Because if their capacity to trust is broken, then it's my role is to build that trust so that they can learn to be vulnerable. When we say vulnerable, I suppose what we're saying is being able to know that the threat is perceived in that moment, and recognizing that it is my difference between my perception of the threat and the reality. And as a coach, it would be completely different again. Because if as a coach, then I'll be guiding somebody. And if I'm teaching them to swim, I can't say, well, you can take off the life jacket. Just be vulnerable, even though you can't swim in the sea. So I suppose there is a moment and a space for vulnerability to be acknowledged. If we're talking about a child and adult, I think we know that child is vulnerable by nature. So it is then recognizing the context and the environment. And then we can decide whether we can open that door and be exposed and trust, or the trust is not yet built. We wait for the vulnerability to a state where that we can actually open that door safely, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for making those important distinctions. Very insightful from the experiences you have in your profession and life. And trust is such a big topic, particularly when it comes to vulnerability. So coming to you now, Renee, in feeling about building trust with people, to have open and honest communications with them. I can imagine with your journey, your life, being vulnerable and creating that trust has been possibly essential in, the services you provide and how you assist people in the world.
Definitely is, and I agree with Indrani that the term vulnerability can be such a wide scope. And I guess with the vulnerability movement and Brené Brown, it can have been overused, authentic vulnerability, or vulnerability in the right place at the right time for the right reason, can be a really powerful tool. And it is all about that environment and the trust that's built between the people that are in that space to allow that vulnerability to come out at the right times for the right reasons. And that can be on both sides, as a healthcare provider and the patient, because sometimes if I'm not open and vulnerable and honest with my patients, I can't expect the same back. So it is a give and take and a two-way street. When it's seen on the other side of that, what's become popular, that social media vulnerability, that getting onto whatever platform and being vulnerable and putting all this stuff out there, sometimes I think that might not be as authentic and appropriate, or might have taken that out of context and almost diluted the powerfulness of what vulnerability in that trusting space is really about.
Yeah, so very true. There's different situations, different scenarios that call for different sides of, different faces of vulnerability, isn't there? And it can really be taken out of context and in context. Yeah, that's a very good point, Renee. And Sabina, coming back to you now and really tuning into confronting our fears, confronting that moment of vulnerability. Sometimes that requires us to be brave, to overcome that fear and conquer that fear. What has fueled you in your life as a way shower to other women in life and in business along your journey?
I think for me, it's about community. For me, it's about people. That is probably the biggest way forward for me when it comes to fear of being vulnerable. I start small and I get used to what it is that I want to talk about, what it is that I need to talk about. And, you know, we're talking about trust. It's also building a trust in myself that I can actually do this. And I always start with the people that I know and the people that I that I know well. So they're the ones that I will talk to first, and I'll build that confidence and I'll build that trust that this is a conversation that can go further. You know, so that's what it is. That's what it's about for me. I use my community and the people close to me for so much, for so many conversations. And, you know, it's a give and take. I do it for them, they do it for me. I could not live without my close friends and without the people around me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Community, of course, gives us that safe environment, and there's many different levels of that, isn't there? And I love that you know, just can feel into starting small and building from there, because sometimes people think, oh, I have to be vulnerable. I'm going to lash out there and share all and bear all. And sometimes that's, you know, not a good experience for them, because, you know, they perhaps bite off more than they can chew. So I love that approach, Sabina. And Angela, for you, if you think about with all the diversity of the clients that you've worked with over your very illustrious career, in many cultures, vulnerability can sometimes be seen as a strength rather than a weakness. So is there a moment perhaps in your journey where embracing vulnerability has really shifted your perspective or opened new doors for you?
So like as in being me being vulnerable or creating safe spaces, I think that so creating safe spaces, you know, like that's my jam, right? Like I'm a coach. One of my values is connection. And unless someone can trust, you know, it's like what we're saying. I mean, we're all practitioners and coaches here. So we're building this, we're creating these environments of safety so that people can transform in some way, shape, or form something. And so I guess I take that very seriously. You know, if I'm working with somebody, I'm the safe space. Like people, yeah, so that trust is really foundational, which is what everyone's been saying. And for myself, like I can just give an example in my own life. Like I self-published a book of poetry, and it's called Poetic Release from Negative Thinking. And that was always one of my dreams, was to, you know, to publish a book of poems, and one of my goals. And when I was looking for a coach, an editor and a coach sort of thing to work with, it's like I went through one other one before I found the one I worked with, whose name was Laura Field. But this woman that I trialed, I could not even share anything. Like I could not bring myself to actually open up and share my work. Like it wasn't that long ago. So that was actually, you know, another transformational journey that I put myself through that required a lot of vulnerability, which was putting my work out there and bearing, you know, my heart and soul. And it was just so interesting, the difference. And then when I met the other woman, Laura Field, she was just like this safety. I just felt this instant. No, she was skilled, so was the other woman, but it was this safety. So it is true what we're saying is that the safety is the gateway to vulnerability, and the gateway to transformation is by, you know, opening up and taking a risk, I guess. So vulnerability is taking a risk, and I couldn't go there with that woman. I just got so triggered. And it was a really interesting experience.
Yeah. It brings up a very good point that it's not a one-way street, vulnerability. You know, it takes both the giver and receiver, if you like, to be in that communication and that trust with one another. Yeah, it's an excellent point. Thank you, Angela. And Indrani, coming back to you now, I was just really feeling that with the kind of people that you help on a day-to-day basis, if someone was really sitting in a space of, I can't possibly be vulnerable, how do I open up? How do I trust people in my life? How do I know they're going to have my back? How would you coach someone or guide someone through that situation?
It's a really good question, because most of the time, if they're I kind of split myself here. if I'm talking as a psychotherapist, and quite often, you know, people would, you know, they're people just like me, you know, no different from me. Obviously, the circumstances in their life at that point has brought them to a place where they need to talk to someone other than those people in their life. So that is where I would say they're different at that point. So I'm not any better or I have any more than those who come to me. I sit in a different circumstances to them when they come to me. So I just want to acknowledge that they are just as precious as anyone else. So when they come, and if they cannot be vulnerable, and as we all talk about, vulnerability is that it has a large portion of that is ability to trust. And also, if I can use a metaphor, if a child can be vulnerable to when their parent says, come on, jump, I'll catch you. And that child trusts the parent wholeheartedly that they're going to catch me. The reason they can trust the parent is because they don't have a logical sense of fear. So they trust wholeheartedly because they have no knowledge of that perceived threat like we do. And then if you ask that child when they're 18 to do the same thing, it's less likely they're going to do it. So my role is then to create them that safe space, like Angela was mentioning earlier as well. To do that safe space, I need to be able to then understand how they see the world at the time. If their view of the world at that point is that world is not a safe place, then my role at that point is to create that safety, help with their view of the world based on where they sit, before I can accept them to be vulnerable. So then that is where my authenticity comes in, without, as you know, talking as a therapeutic alignments, we don't self-disclose. So we, you know, it's not like that I could, you know, come up and say, well, you know, this is my story, so I'm going to be vulnerable with you, which will take away from that person's story. So it's my role is to, sorry to go on, story is to create a space that is safe, so that they can feel heard and belong in that space. So I think for me, if we want to help anyone to be vulnerable as a therapist, coach, or a friend, it is that allowing that person to feel there is no expectations of you. But I just want to hold this space, like that parent or the father or the mother having their arms out. I'm ready to hold you. And non-judgmentally. So if you want to open up, if you want to fall, I will catch you. And I think that's the space that I've tried to create.
Beautiful. Thank you, Indrani. And coming to you now, Renee, I know you're a bit of a mover and a shaker in the business world. You like to get out there. You're very community driven and building community. So for you, if you were to tune into any daily practices or rituals, mindsets that you take yourself through to help you become more comfortable with being out there in business, being vulnerable, particularly in more high stakes situations, like when you might be a speaker or, you know, coordinating a networking group, what do you employ in your own practices that you could suggest to others?
Great question. And wow, complicated. I always say that I'm an introverted extrovert. I don't naturally enjoy actually being in front of people and being in a big group and networking. It's something I've had to practice for a really long time, and I guess now I'm really good at faking it until I make it. But at the start, it was doing little things like giving myself a job, because then it took the focus away from me. It might be that I would take somebody with me. And even though I knew a lot of people in the room, if I was going in and talking just about myself, I would find that really difficult. But if I took a friend and started introducing that friend and telling everybody about that friend and that friend's business, I would feel much more comfortable. And then it was just slowly being more comfortable in seeing those people respond quite positively, and then being able to open up and speak a little bit more about myself and be more confident and comfortable in my own role and in my own skin. Yeah, it's a work in progress, and I can't confess to being perfect at it. It's more about practice makes perfect, and the more you do it and the more you have positive experiences and the more you realize that, you know, it's that fear, as Indrani was talking about. We have so many built up fears, whether they're real or not. I've never walked into a room of people and had everybody laugh at me or talk horribly about me. Yet you kind of have that little voice in the back of your head always going, is this actually going to, you know, happen? So yeah, I think it literally is, you do it scared the first time and the second time and maybe the 100th time, but eventually the more you do it, the easier it gets, and the more you've reinforced that positive experience that no, I can do this, this is fine, I know what I'm doing, and that lets you be more and more confident and do it. But it's always that first step, that first leap of just walking into that room. And as I said, that's where sometimes using somebody else, or giving yourself a job that you have to meet somebody in the room that you might want to introduce to somebody else in the room because you think those two people will get along. Whatever games you have to play with your mind to make you take that first step and then keep doing it.
Beautiful. I love those strategies, Renee. You know, it's so great to hear from your perspective as an introvert moving into the extrovert space, that can be a very real situation for many people. So I love the roadmap that you've just laid out there for us. Thank you. Sabina, coming back to you, you're a coach. You've had many clients over the years. Is there perhaps a case study of someone who in the beginning was not as open to sharing the truth about where they were at in their life, in their business, and you really coached them through a process to help them come to more the truth of where things were at for them so you could create meaningful change for them? Is there someone that perhaps comes to mind?
There is. And for me, it's not necessarily about them realizing that there's a truth. For me, it's you know, you don't know what you don't know, right? So when it comes to business, you have this belief that you've done everything, that you've got it right, that you've got the foundations, and then things don't work. So all of a sudden you start going, well, I can't do this. No one trusts me. No one likes me, you know, and all these negative beliefs come in. So I think for me, it's not necessarily about, I think it's more about understanding what it is that they need to do and start believing in themselves. You know, so I spoke to someone the other day, and I'm just going back to the strategies. I spoke to someone the other day, and they couldn't speak up. They actually couldn't talk about what it was that they did. But it's not that they had this lack of belief in themselves about what they do. They were so fearful of speaking that they just actually physically can't do it. So I've encouraged them to come to Power Talk, which is a group that I'm part of. And see, I see myself in that. A few years ago when I started Power Talk, I really struggled to speak up as well and explain what it was that I did in a way that made sense to people. And I couldn't say that in front of a group of people at all because I had this fear that all these people, even 10 people, would just laugh or judge, you know. But I just started going to Power Talk training and public speaking training, and I knew it was a safe space and I could be vulnerable in there. I needed to obviously build that trust in that group as well, that it was okay to be vulnerable in there. But eventually it's come without me even realizing. And I look back now and I go, oh my God, how far have I come? Because like Renee, I'm more of an introvert, and I've had to learn to get out there and speak to people and communicate and connect. And so I hear these stories from people that come to me that go, this is not working. What's missing? Or what am I not doing? Or, you know, how do I do this? And often they do have to build up a trust in themselves, but often they can do that just by filling in those little gaps. And it's my role to find those little gaps.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that not only you have case studies of others, but quite often we are our own best case study. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, fantastic. Angela, coming back to you. So you are a branding expert, particularly around personal branding, vision, accountability, to make sure people show up for this dream that we all wish to create in our life and business. So where do you feel that vulnerability really becomes a strength, particularly in the personal branding space, and really connecting businesses with their audiences?
Yes, so it can be a story of vulnerability. It doesn't have to be, but what it absolutely has to be is a story of passion. See, personal branding is very strategic and it's built around your target audience. But it's also about what do you share around your personality and yourself that's going to add value to professional credibility. So that's what the work of personal branding when people come to me. So it's about clarifying, articulating, documenting, and sharing. And so, but what do you share? You know, and that comes back to the potentially to the vulnerability piece, but it's not necessarily everything. So it's what we were sort of talking about before. It's like, it's not like you're going to share everything about your life and that's personal branding. It's what's relevant to your audience. So if, for example, creating She Simply Impacts, you know, what it was relevant to my audience, that I am, you know, like my childhood, the childhood story of, you know, being sort of, you know, under the domestic violence and the mental illness and all that sort of thing with my dad and all that is relevant in She Simply Impacts, because it's about being heard, supported, and becoming unstoppable, and it's heal, emerge, thrive, impact. So we have to heal all that stuff if we really want to transform and make an impact, whatever that looks like for us. But in my other business, for example, I don't share that because that's not relevant. Most of my clients in that business, I work with lots and lots of guys, and that story isn't relevant, but the story of, you know, passion for leverage and my story about getting from A to B faster and smarter, I mean, that just happens to be the way I operate. You know, it's like I have a brain that wants to, you know, quickly get somewhere. And so that's, you know, my passion for leverage. And when I actually discovered that business was about leverage, and once I discovered that, wow, you could work part-time and make a full-time income, like, you know, I discovered that a long time ago, you know, like when I was just starting to work. And so that's leverage, you know, and I'm passionate about leverage. So and personal branding is a leverage story, a leverage strategy. It's a marketing strategy. So I guess in my work as a personal branding strategist, it's not necessary. I mean, vulnerability can definitely come into it. There is no doubt. There is no doubt that, but as long as it's authentic, as long as it's not fake, you know, because it's got to be authentic. It's got to be, but mainly it's your passion. It's your passion and what pisses you off that you want to change or you want to impact. They're the stories that are special, that we want to capture, and we want to make sure they're relevant to the audience.
Yeah, fabulous. And before we leave you, do you two perhaps have a case study of someone that you've worked with, someone that really the power of their passionate story came out in their personal brand and you really saw a transformation for them and their business?
Definitely, because like I've worked with an author, and because it's really going deeply into your why, because what we're looking for is we're looking for a narrative that's very authentic, that could be your values. It could be, you know, because it's got to be that real strong link with why you're doing what you're doing. And one session I had with a client, she was actually in tears at the end of it, because she realized, because it, you know, I really delved into what really has motivated you, what motivates you to do this, you know, and why are you passionate about this? And then she realized that it was unfinished business from her mum's life. Her mum was really passionate about activism. So her mum was kind of an activist, and her mum got so far, and that story of her mum's sort of standing out for something that she believed in that wasn't necessarily the conventional viewpoint, and then now she's doing the same. She's standing up for something she believes in that isn't necessarily conventional, and the link went right back to her mum, which she hadn't seen. And so that it was kind of like connecting the dots, because once we really connect the dots for ourselves, the confidence that comes from that, that's transformational, and learning how to articulate that and learning what actually drives us. And it's really fun to delve right back, because it is, because that makes it really powerful somehow that she, you know, she's really driven to do this, and it's like in her, almost her bloodline, you know, like her she's carrying on something that her mum started. So that's just one small example. I've got a video testimonial of her after that session, and she was in tears. But it's very transformational work, which is also why I love it.
Absolutely. And what I love in what you've just shared is that sometimes the necessity to be vulnerable, to uncover more of our why, doesn't always have to be in public. It can be in that safe environment so that we strengthen our resolve as to why we are going out in business, and then we go and do our thing. So, you know, there's different environments, different scenarios, isn't there? Yeah.
And She Simply Impacts, you know, we don't record our sessions, even though there's a pool to record them, because it's like if people miss the time, then there's nothing that they can watch. But that's why we're creating these panel discussions and things. But, you know, that's right. It's not about necessarily having to be vulnerable to everyone, but it's just about uncovering the layers for ourselves so that we are resolved, you know, so we're complete. So we've healed anything that needs to be healed so that we can move on to what we want to create.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And vulnerability, what I can take from that is so important with vulnerability that we are fueled by our stories rather than still caught in them. And that's a distinction that I very much like to make when we're talking about vulnerability in our stories. Yeah, fantastic. Great. Indrani, coming back to you and really feeling sometimes in our life we have way showers, people that we looked up to, whether they're in our life or whether they're even public figures. Has there been anyone throughout your journey that you have seen is a real way shower in the vulnerability space and having that fuel their confidence in however they're getting themselves out into the world?
Sorry, the person that really comes to my mind is my mother, who's not here today. She had I think, open door where it's like she parked the vulnerability over there. And because my mother was a mother of 6, and when my father had left when I was 4. So she had to be able to learn to be uncomfortable, to be able to make things happen. And I remember one of the things that my mother always said to us, if we said to her, I didn't put it there, and she would say, well, you were right next to it, you saw it, so now it's your job, because you have the capacity to do it more than anyone else, because you're right there. And to me, you know, that's a little bit, is like that vulnerability that we can, what my mother showed me was that as well as trying to say, I have a right not to do that, and I'm letting go of that control and almost willing to serve, willing to do what was necessary. And I think today's world, there's so much of I have a right to if I don't want to. I think we leave ourselves to open more, grow more by being able to be willing to go, well, for example, you know, if my position was a little above you, so that's your job, why should I do it? And my mother always showed me, well, you know, just do it, because that is that ability to let go. I think that shield that we hold sometimes. And she was always that person who, in my culture, vulnerability is a bad word. You don't expose yourself. And I think learning from my mother, I think I am, for me, as to my knowledge, I think I'm the second woman in their whole generation that is willing to tell the story as it is, without sugarcoating it. Because to me, coming from that culture, learning from my mom and for me, and one of the biggest point of vulnerability for me was my faith, because to me, I can open myself to learn and to serve because I'm not alone. That feeling, I think when you're feeling alone, that is when it's very difficult to be vulnerable, because there's a fear of there's no safety. I think if you have that, to me, with that faith comes the ability to serve and to be served as well. Where my mother also one of these people who I was very difficult. I was a person who found difficulty to ask for help. I have no problem doing, but not receiving. And took me a while to realize that was a pride. You know, I would hide behind my pride and struggle hidden behind doors and pretend that I was okay. You know, so when we can let go of that, there's so much liberty. Because I learned that until I was able to do that, I almost had no right to offer my help to somebody else because I wasn't willing to receive. So, yeah.
So powerful, Indrani. Thank you so much for showing your vulnerability today and sharing a snippet of your true story, you know, behind the lens, behind the cameras, if you will. Very powerful. And Renee, now coming back to you, I loved, you know, your practical approach to vulnerability, and a very measured approach too, is what I can feel in a lot of your sharing. So what role do you feel support systems like She Simply Impacts and other communities that we're a part of play in helping women embrace vulnerability as a strength? And how do you feel like we might be able to create more supportive environments for them, more opportunities?
Yeah, look, that supportive environment is absolutely essential, and creating those supportive environments. Women need to support each other, build each other up, be each other's cheerleaders. You can't have a powerful, supportive group if you're not there to be 100% vulnerable and accepting and supporting. For far too long, I think women have kind of been in competition with each other, and we've seen it. I've come from the corporate world, and being in a corporate world, oftentimes it was not being vulnerable, it was not being supportive, it was dog eat dog. You stood on whoever you had to stand on to get up the next rung. And I think we really hurt ourselves, we hurt women. Whereas when we're working together and supporting each other and celebrating each other's wins, we actually go so much further, so much quicker, because we're growing and experiencing together. So those communities are really, really important. And then it's making sure that the people you let into those communities, of course, are going to be there with the same authentic truth and values as you.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said. Thank you so much. I can feel your enthusiasm as you share that as a real way shower there too. So perhaps at this point, Angela, we might come back to you to wrap us up for some final comments on, you know, we have a beautiful audience here in She Simply Impacts. We have, through your vision, created this platform where people are encouraged to be vulnerable. It is seen as a strength in this culture. how would you like to encourage people to take that step for themselves in either stepping into environments like this or just embracing this vulnerability so they can unlock their true potential?
Definitely. I think a lot of it, I mean, we've all shared such amazing stuff in the call. And I think what Indrani was saying is just so particularly pertinent in that, you know, if you're silently suffering because you are, you know, ashamed or you don't want people to know what's really going on, like that's what we're here to disintegrate, because that is no way to live, and it's no joy in that, and there's no transformation in that. And so we're all on a journey together to lift each other up. And so it's like just it's that thing about risking and just give it a go, show up, because you never know. You just might connect with that one person, or one person may just say one thing that resonates, that can just unlock, because we're looking to unlock so that we can, experience more joy, more freedom, more impact, more community, more love. That's really what it's about. And it's fun. It's really fun.
Absolutely. It's so true.
I guess that's
it really can be.
why I'm so passionate about vulnerability as a topic, because it's, no one wants to be vulnerable. It's horrible. It feels yucky, at the time, but it's really a gateway. I can, promise that. I definitely can promise that.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I suppose in closing, from my perspective, I would say that vulnerability can take a lot of courage, but the other side of it reaps many, many rewards on so many levels, acknowledging our own wisdom and encouraging others to take those courageous steps as well. So I'd like to offer a sincere thanks to all of the panelists today for vulnerably sharing your own experiences, that of those you help, and being a part of this incredible community within the She Simply Impacts platform. Let's all go out there courageously into the world and really unite both our authenticity and our strengths so that they can coexist harmoniously and with a bit of fun as we go along the way. All right, thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.